All right, good morning, everybody. My name is John Miller. I handle marketing and media for Lead to Goals. Wanted to welcome you today. Thank you for joining us for the Effective Communications presentation. Just a little bit about our presenter. Today's presenter is Scott DeLong. He is a bootstrap entrepreneur, business leader, coach, and teacher. Over the course of his career, he has built 3 businesses from the ground up and successfully exited each of them. He has also served as an interim president, among other executive leadership roles, for several companies with the purpose of developing the company and their people to get them to a point where a smooth transition can occur with new management. Scott is a lifelong learner and has earned a master's degree in leadership development at the age of 54 and continued to earn his doctorate in leadership studies. He loves delivering the content he has developed. His mission and that of his company, Lead to Goals, is to work with organizations to develop their leadership to reach their vision through thoughtful alignment of their mission and values. With that, I'm happy to introduce Scott DeLong.
Hi there. First of all, thank you all for coming to the presentation. I really appreciate the time, and we're going to keep it to the 50 minutes that I promised, so you'll be able to get out. At the end, I'll stick around later if people have additional questions that they want to talk through, ask, or whatever, but the chat function is available. John's going to manage that for us. If there's any questions that come up that you want to interrupt with, John, go ahead. Otherwise, we can wait till the end in that. So communications for me is a big deal, and being effective in anything I do is another big deal. Most of us think we do a pretty good job of communicating. We're really clear on what we say. The problem is, and I believe this strongly, that communication is not what I say, but is what you hear and understand or interpret. So just because I say whatever it is, I make some statement, and I look around the room, and tell me if this has happened to folks, right? You look around the room and you say, okay, everyone understands what I mean, right? Everybody always says right. They do understand. A week later, when the project's due, what comes back to you is 7 or 8 different versions of what it is that you had asked for. You were very clear. You were very concise. It was very easy to understand, yet 6, 7 people understood things differently than what you thought the message that you were given. So keep this in mind. Communication is what they hear and interpret, not what you say. Big part of that. So what we're going to go through today is basically sort of a keynote of a course that we teach. The course is an 11-week long course, 90 minutes a session, 11 consecutive weeks, and we use textbooks along with this as well. It's designed sort of like a grad school class where people read, they do a little bit of writing, and then they talk about what it is that they learned from that, and then we share experiences with each other. And the learning actually is what we call a reverse classroom. The learning comes from the community. I'm there to facilitate, I'm there to challenge, to question, to do all those sorts of things. However, the real learning comes from each other. The interesting thing about what happened with this course, and this is the course that I actually did my doctoral dissertation on, is developing an effective communication. But it wasn't about communication. It was about building trust in a cross-functional work team. So people from different departments, you had salespeople in there and accounting people, you had legal people in there and marketing folks, all in these groups. And what we were rating was the level of trust that increases based on good communication and understanding what communication looks like. So the results went through the roof. Everyone believed the other folks were competent and did okay at their job and all of that. But what ended up happening was the affective trust grew like 134% on average between the groups that were doing this. It was truly incredible. And that was simply because they worked together, they learned to talk together and listen to each other. So it's all about dialogue. What is dialogue? It's a discussion of 2 or more people. It's directed to our exploration of a subject or resolution of a problem. It's a pretty simple definition of dialogue. Dialogue is not me talking at you like we're doing now. This is lecturing. Dialogue is for me to throw out an idea, enlist what your thoughts are on that idea, discuss, debate, maybe argue over them, but hopefully not so much, but discuss and debate the different concepts and how that goes wrong. And my belief is that the further we get into dialogue, the better our outcomes are going to be. So there you are. What are the benefits? Mutual understanding. We can deal with emotion-laden, divisive content. We manage diverse opinions. We share interest and establish common ground, develop cohesive in the community, create new ways of seeing and doing things, otherwise known as synergy. And the main thing that it does is, if we do this properly, it increases the level of trust between the people that are engaged. So let's talk about conflict for a minute. Your screens aren't on, but right now, if I would ask the group, how many of you would raise your hand if you like conflict? I might see one or two hands. That would be about as much as I would see out of a group this size. People avoid conflict. The fight or flight syndrome come in. Those that love it will go in there and fight and go to battle and go win. And those that don't will give in. The third thing that happens with conflict is what's called compromise. And that's what Congress ends up doing usually. Right now, they're in fight mode and they're not getting along at all. But in order to get anything done, they have to compromise. Well, my suggestion is that there's a better way, that we don't have to just go straight to compromise. We don't have to fight, and we don't have to fight to run away from it. So the fear of conflict is what keeps us away engaging in dialogue, and it keeps us creating that word synergy. Synergy, for those of you that don't know, is just a combination of more than my ideas. Mine plus yours equals something greater than we could either of us by ourselves. Synergy is good for a business. So how does this relate to trust? I've talked about that a couple times already. This theory, which is called the circle of trust, was developed again for the doctoral presentation. And it basically says most people believe that trust is developed by you continually doing what you say you're going to do, and me recognizing that I can trust that you're going to do it again. It takes a while to build that. I need to watch several times in order to see. There are different levels of people's willingness to trust, the seeing trusting behaviors and propensity to trust, all that, certainly. But most people believe that if you keep doing what you say you're going to do, eventually I'll start trusting you. And that's the way it works. What this theory suggests is that there is a different way. And through communication, in fact, if you look at this circle, half of the circle is developed around communication, but it starts with a different concept, and that is the concept of respect. If you were like I was when I grew up, I had heard all the old men in the room always say, well, respect is earned, it's not given. And while it is true, respect certainly can be earned. What I'm talking about here with this respect is the respect that should be, and you're not going to hear me say that word should very often, but should be granted to all of us. The respect for another's human dignity, the respect for another's human experience, the respect for humanity. Can we start there? Can we just look at the other person as a competent human being? Start there. The next step is to go to a Stephen Covey concept, and that is listening to understand. Seek first to understand, as he puts it, but listening to understand as opposed to listening to reply. How often do we listen to reply? We hear somebody's statement, and we come back really quick with what our statement is. We're replying to their answer. As listening to understand is a little bit different. Actually quite a bit different. So sure, all the listening techniques that we need to that you're being taught are important. Making eye contact, mirroring, paraphrasing, nodding your head, doing those kind of things. Those are all valuable and important, but I think listening to understand is a little bit deeper, and there's a couple other techniques that you can use that will aid in that. Listening to understand you requires me not just to do those typical listening events, but it requires me to go deeper into your subject. I go deeper by asking questions, open-ended questions based on your content, not accusatory type questions, but open-ended questions. One of my favorite is, well, that's interesting. I don't see it like that. Can you tell me more? You're engaging in dialogue because you're asking the other person to go a little bit deeper. We'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. The next step from this is a concept that I learned in Entrepreneur Organization. EO is a great group of business leaders, and they taught me to do something that I didn't grow up doing, and that is learning how to share with other people. Men in my generation in particular, we weren't very good at this whole sharing concept. So sharing from your experience is different than telling somebody what to do, giving advice. For those of you who are parents in the room, let's go with this. How many of you, and I can't see your hands, but just think through this. How many of you think back with your kids, have a 2-year-old that like to be told what to do? Their first answer is always no, isn't it? How about 12-year-old? How about teenager? How about adult children? How about your parents? How about neighbors? How about your employees? I don't know anybody that wants to be told what to do. However, people do come from advice from time to time. And what I do now is I share from my experience. Well, this happened to me. Here was the situation. Here's what happened. And the most important piece of this, and this is where it really got deep, is, and here's how I felt about that. The feelings, that pit in the gut of your stomach, or the happiness, or the whatever the story related to, that is a story that resonates with people. Not just what happened and why it happened, but how it made them feel. So the sharing from experience is still trying to provide some assistance to somebody that needs it, but not in the direct should way. So I had to train myself on eliminating the word should, because I absolutely have no idea what you should do. I don't have your background. I don't have your experience. I don't have your knowledge. I don't have your problems. I don't have to deal with the outcomes. So who am I to say what you should do? Take the word out of my vocabulary. I become a better human overnight. Now, the way I taught myself, it was interesting. I had to actually trick myself into that, and I put a judgment value on it. And when I use the word should, talking about other people, there's things I should do. I know that. Like, I can tell myself what I should do. But if I'm going to tell somebody else what they should do, I consider that a pretty arrogant proposition. And arrogant was a word I couldn't stand. I hated it. I grew up being a really confident individual, and people said, well, you're arrogant. Not anyway, so that word it's like nails on a chalkboard to me when I hear arrogant. So that's how I trained myself to take the word should out of my vocabulary when speaking about others, as I assimilated that with an arrogant proposition. I am arrogant to believe that I know what you should do. I don't have to live with the outcomes. I don't know what you should do. All right. Here's a key tenet of the communication process in my mind, in the communication hierarchy. We talked a little bit about conflict, not very much. I mean, this is a shorter version of what the course is all about. So bear with me on this. But the theory behind the communication hierarchy is that the further, the closer to the potential of any conflict being a difference of opinion, the higher you need to go on this hierarchy. All right. The gold standard of communication, face-to-face. It's just the gold standard. Having a conversation with somebody face-to-face is definitely better than the video chat or Zoom, what we're doing right now. This is even difficult for me because I can't see your faces and I don't see how you're reacting to what I'm talking about. So this to me is no different than the next level down, which is just a phone call. However, I still don't get to hear you. I'm not here. I mean, I see some chat things coming up, but I don't get to hear the tone, the inflection, and all the different things that are coming out. So if we were face to face, this would be a better conversation. Next below that, the video chat. Below that is phone call. You know what comes below that? The thing that most of us go as our first line of defense, email. How many times do we shoot off an email when we should be making a phone call? How many times do we shoot off an email when I should walk down the hall to go see someone, or drive across the neighborhood, or drive across the city to go view somebody if there's potential for conflict? And I'm going to ask you this second question is, how many times have you sent an email that was misinterpreted? Meaning the people read it nastier than you wrote it, than you felt you wrote it. Again, communication is what they hear and understand, not what you say. There's a propensity among humans to read emails with a negative slant. For instance, if you put in an email that is a neutral position, it will be read in a negative light. If you put one in a negative light, it will be read as if you're screaming at them. If you write an email that has a positive intention, it'll only become neutral. Recently had a birthday, and this is a pretty good example, I think, is, on your birthday, and you go on Facebook and you have hundreds of people saying, happy birthday. That's cool. I appreciate it. But those people that called me or sent a card, that's an effort. That's appreciated even more. Higher up that communication is more meaningful. Yet in business, we use email as our first line of defense or offense in some cases. Below that is text. And the only reason it's below email is because there's fewer characters that you can put on there. There's some thought and theories now that text may be a higher form of communication than email. And that's simply because you gave me your cell phone number. Therefore, we have a better connection, potentially a better connection than if I just had your email. So text or Slack or things like that could be above email, could be below, depending on your point of view on that. But because of fewer characters, I put it below. Below text, carrier pigeons, smoke signals, telegraph, right? Everyone think that's pretty much the lowest form of communication? There's one below that. Only thing worse than sending something on a telegraph would be to assume. For me to assume, I know what you're thinking. For me to assume, I know the answer that you were going to give. For me to assume anything about you. Because again, I don't have your experience. I don't have your background. I don't have your knowledge. I don't have the consequences that you're facing. And for me to make an assumption of what you would say rather than ask you what you say, again, that goes to arrogance. All right.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt. We had a question from Mark. I was just going to let him ask it himself.
Okay.
Mark?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark. I'm calling from the UK, so it's dark and evening here. But just a question, Scott. I do quite a lot of listening coaching, and often one of the sort of discussions we have with clients is around the whole kind of all the different ways that listening can be hindered. And one of the discussions that we often have is around this whole issue of experience sharing, and I call it sort of experience top trumps. Yeah. Have you got any wisdom and advice on how we can authentically share experiences without one person's experience seeking to trump another person's, which in reality means it's just kind of intersecting monologues. One person ultimately wants to share a better story and get their opinion in, and the really helpful concept that you've just suggested ends up breaking down. Have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, and I do actually. And it ends up being part of the evolution of the idea of the circle of trust. And in fact, it starts with, so when the first version started with respect, right? And that's an important piece. Do I have respect for the other person, or am I trying to trump them? But what I label that in our first stage is, and you'll see this in the later slide, is intent. What is the intention behind that? If my intention is to trump your story, then I don't belong in the story. It's no different than me telling you what to do, me showing my dominance, me showing my whatever. So it's a self-reflective portion, I believe. What do you do when someone else is doing it? Well, eventually I end up walking away is what I do, right? That's not who I need in my life, is people that are trying to trump me. Now, I believe in second chances. I believe in people needing to learn how to do things and all that. So I'm not just saying walk away from individuals right away. But I think if the intention is for me to show you up, that's not my conversation. I don't belong there. They don't need that from me. My intention is to provide support and help them with whatever their problem, their situation was. If I walk in with that attitude, then I'm not going to be worried about trumping folks. Now, you've got I'm going to preface this with another thing too, and this usually comes later in the presentation, but once you get through this whole system, I can guarantee it works 95% of the time. The 5% that it doesn't work with are narcissists and sociopaths. That's about 5% of the population, according to the studies that I've seen. It doesn't matter. If you're dealing with a narcissist, their intent is what? It's all about me. But if we're dealing with this relationship building process that I'm talking about here through dialogue, that's not my intent. My intent is to build a relationship. And then in order to do that, practice these processes in order to make more sense. Does that help, Mark?
Yeah, great help. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So a lot of this comes not just from experience, but this is the textbook that I use when I do the course, and I suggest everybody read it. I've read it 100 and something times because the first time I read it, it was pretty cool. It was all right. First time I went through a course with it, that's pretty good. Got more, and I read it and I read it and I read it. But so I don't believe you can just read a book and master the subject. I just don't. I'm not smart enough to be able to do that. I don't know how many people are. But this book called Crucial Conversation, Tools for Talking When the Stakes Are High. They define a crucial conversation as one where the opinions vary, emotions are strong, and the stakes are high. If it's missing those elements, it's really not a crucial conversation. It's one that could be avoided potentially. So this applies to crucial conversations, but actually it applies to almost all conversations. The process is pretty simple. And it could seem fluffy from time to time, but really it's not. And they say start with the heart. That's one of the concepts that Granny and his peers wrote. But all that means is start by answering these questions for yourself. What is it that I want? What do I want for the other person? What do I want for the relationship? So me, as I've grown older now, I used to go with question number one, what I want, and I'm going to push my way and I'm going to get that, right? It didn't matter what the other person needed or wanted. But what I found later in my life is that it's the third question that ends up being the most important to me. What is it that I want for the relationship? Whether that's a business relationship or a personal relationship, I don't care. What do I want for that relationship? If I don't care about it, if it's just transactional, for instance, if I went to go buy a Slurpee at 7-Eleven, I just want to get a Slurpee and here's my $1.25 or whatever it costs, transactional, and we're not developing a relationship, we don't need to go through all this work. But for people that matters, this work matters. Once I have the answer to those questions, what is it that I want? What do I want for the relationship? The next question I ask is what I'm going to do next going to get me what I want. I believe you can get what you want often if you have enough power to get it, but that's short-term thinking. Getting things done for you through power, you can get compliance, but you can't get commitment. Working with people through dialogue, you can get commitment. And this is really the basis of starting and building teams, building relationships, all that. I want a commitment. That's what I want in business. The people that are working for me, I want commitment, not just compliance. So think about those words. There's a lot of scholars that are now talking about a concept called psychological safety. And psychological safety is just it can be defined, but it's a feeling that people have that it is okay to be able to say what I need to say. That I'm not going to get beat up for saying it. I'm not going to get yelled at. I'm not going to get fired. I'm not going to get whatever. Now, there's a way of saying things that can get you any of those things, fired, whatever. If I come in hostile to a scenario, even though it started with psychological safety and I broke it by being hostile, sure, I can break that safety down really quick. But what I'm looking to do, especially if there's power differentiations, is that I'm trying to create psychological safety in that room. I want people to speak their mind. I actually need them to speak their mind. I need critique. I don't like it. I don't like people telling me where I could do better, where I did wrong, but I need it because if I wouldn't be doing it if I knew it was wrong. And if I don't know, I should be open to hearing because here's how I view it. And here's how it worked for me. And that is, I believe that if anyone's going to critique me, they are doing it with good intentions because they're actually trying to help me. Now, if you took a look at critique from that frame, these folks are trying to help. Doesn't mean they're right. I'm not saying any critique you need to adjust to. But what I'm saying is their intention, except for that 5% we were talking about, their intention, especially if I have a relationship with them, is to try to help me. And however they think the best way to help is. That allowed me to be able to accept critique better, to actually request it. And you'll see at the end of this, I'm going to ask you to connect with me on LinkedIn. And once you do, write me a little letter about, a little note on the messenger that says something about what you got out of it, what was good and what was bad. I want to eliminate the bad. I don't know what's bad in here. I wouldn't be presenting it if I thought it was. But if you thought there were things that could be improved, I'd love to hear that. Now, what's my face going to look like when I'm reading your critiques? I'm, kind of grouchy and growly, but that changes really quick because I do know that your intention with the critique is to help me. There was a study back in the 60s that talked about 93% of communication is nonverbal. That's BS. It's not true. The study had its flaws, but and it really wasn't, the methodology used in the study wasn't appropriate enough to make that claim that 93% of communication is nonverbal. I will tell you, though, a lot of communication is nonverbal. I know that to be true because I'm very clear on the words that I say. I am very specific on the words that I use in certain instances, all instances, but in certain instances, I will use words that have very clear and concise meaning that get turned around on me. This happens at home because my wife says it's not what you said, it's how you said it. Now, everyone's raising their hand. They've heard that before as well. So body language does matter. Facial expressions do matter. The tone of voice that you use do matter. Those things all matter. What matters is what they're hearing. And if we're clouding our message with negative body language, negative facial expressions, negative tone, they won't even potentially hear a positive message. I apply that to email as well. Even though I'm trying to use nice language and emojis, I'm still sending a critique. And guess what that's going to be heard as? It's going to be heard as a slam against them, right? So emojis don't fix the problem with the email situation. But the point here is to learn to look when the safety is at risk. And you can tell when it's not safe in the room for whatever conversation. Most of the time, if you pay attention to the body language, facial expressions, the tone that someone's using. If I just got off the phone with someone and I just got yelled at and I started yelling back at them and you walk in asking for a raise, probably not good timing, right? Doesn't look like a safe space. So go back and look for that safe space and look to do that. Most of us, there are 6 techniques here that people use when it's not safe. When you see masking, avoiding, or withdrawing, they don't feel safe. When you are controlling, labeling, attacking, you're not making it safe. So those are some keys and clues. Once it's safe, or if it's not safe, remember we talked about fight or flight a little bit earlier. When it's not safe, it's okay to step out, doing the flight, get away from it. It's not okay if you don't step back in to a crucial conversation, one that's important, one where opinions where it matters, like that it's significant. So the process is to step out, flight. But if you don't step back in, you are definitely staying in flight, and that's not the way to handle the conflict. So step back in once it becomes safe again. And sometimes it only takes a minute. Sometimes I need to take a deep breath, calm myself down. If the other person is doing the same thing, we don't need to really step out, but we stepped out for a second and came back. But the stepping back in might take an effort. You might say, whoa, this is not going anywhere near how I thought it was going to go. Can we take a few minutes? Can we circle back after lunch? Why don't we meet at 2:00? Let's sleep on this tonight. Can we come back in the morning and talk about it again? What time's good for you? Right? Making an appointment to step back in is important. That way they know you're coming back. They know this is important. This is going to be important for you to do. You need it. They need it. Let's get it done and make an appointment to make that happen. The other thing is to apologize when appropriate. Don't just make a fake apology. Just, oh, I'm sorry, if you don't mean it. But apologize when appropriate. If you've done something that harms another person, regardless of your intent, it harmed them. I saw some meme yesterday. My wife happened to point it out to me. Again, this is where I usually get in trouble because I'm not as good with my wife as I am with others. I'm just not. And a lot of us are like that. We take advantage of the people that are closest to us. Not intentionally. It happens that way, though. So she showed me this meme that said, an apology is not an apology if it says, I'm sorry if you feel like, that's putting the blame on you. It's your fault for feeling that way. An apology starts with, I'm sorry because I'm sorry for, I'm sorry because, not if. I love that. It was really good. Makes me think about the way I want to say an apology. I don't want to own everything. Not everything's my fault. But what is my fault, I need to take responsibility for. And I'm going to tell you, in almost any situation, no matter how wrong the other person is, there's something in there that you could have done better too, even if it's only 1%. They're 99% at fault. I got to have 1% of that somewhere. Hardly ever have I ever seen it's 100% somebody else. It's just not, if you really self-analyze and you go through it. And if I apologize for my part in that, that helps reset. Another technique they use is contrasting. Hey, I don't want to have a fight with you. What I do want is to work through this issue and discuss it with you, find a solution for the kids, for the workers, for the whatever it's going to be. So contrasting, here's what I don't want. Here's what I do want. And then creating mutual purpose. This is how you build a team in the first place. And that is to have a shared vision, create purpose that we can both align on. And you may have to brainstorm on that. If we're so far apart in this conflict, right, we may have to brainstorm ideas that we can both agree to. Oh yeah, well, it really is important for us to smile, or whatever the scenario is going to be. So creating mutual purpose, because here's where it is. Do they believe I care? Do they believe I respect them? If the answer to either of those questions is no, you're not going to get very far in dialogue. You're not going to be able to get what you want, what's in it for them, what's in it for the relationship. People need to believe you care. Care is a big word. Care is one of the ones that I think is probably the primal word for building relationships. I don't think that you can learn to love if you don't first care. I don't think that you can build this organization where people want to be around you if you don't care, or if they don't believe that you care. So care is a big piece of this too. And then the respect piece we talked about in the circle of trust. Can I show someone respect even when I don't respect them? The answer is yes, you can. I don't respect you for having multiple affairs, but I respect you as a human. I don't know why you had those. I don't, right? And I don't mean to get into moral judgments, but I use that as an example. But you can end up respecting somebody for the humanity, even though you don't respect them for their actions. We can keep going down from things that we have in common. And if they're not here, we can keep coming down. We're both in business, or we're both men just trying to figure it out, or we're both just wanting to be happy, right? There's always something that we can end up connecting on, and then show a level of respect for that there. We have something in common, at least on a lower level. And yes, I can start there. Mastering my stories. This is all about deciding what stories we lay on the set of facts to create my new set of facts. I've got a friend, and he says it like this. How he challenges himself is, he says, is it true? That's a good start. Is it true? Now, is it true based on my frame? Because all these things happened to me over here. I learned all this garbage happened to me over here. I lay that on a set of facts. That becomes my new set of facts, and that not have anything to do with that fact, because this person over here had the same thing happen to them. So which set of facts are we arguing from? The stories or actually the fact? So get back down to the fact. Let's deal with the fact. The three clever stories that people tell themselves, that they're a victim, the other person's a villain, or that they're helpless. Right? So the stories that we lay on the facts give us one of those clever stories, is what the authors say in this book. And none of those three positions, them being a villain, me being a victim, or I'm helpless, help create dialogue. So see what we can do about getting back to the facts so that we can eliminate the clever stories, and then take a look at yourself. Am I in silence or violence? I need to get in touch with my feelings, analyze the story, get back to facts. Exploring other paths. This is critical. This comes before, go back to the circle of trust again. This comes before sharing my story. It is listening to theirs. Well, why do I want to give them their story first? There's several reasons. One is your story has new information for me. Just listening to you is going to make me smarter. I may not agree with what you're saying, but I'm going to have more data points now. Those data points can either make me smarter, can give me a way to combat what you're thinking and outflank you. And if we're going to just go into the whole negotiation thing. So that's the primary reason. But I think a more important reason than the primary reason is, if you we come, let's say you and I came into this scenario and we had some conflict that created some hostility. The fastest way for me to escalate that hostility is the replying every time you said something. You said this, so I got to say something that trumps yours so that you say something that trumps mine. And then it just continues to escalate. The fastest way to de-escalate what I found is for me to generally care about what your story is and ask you further questions about your story. I want to get to their why. Why is this important to them? I don't want to use the word why though, because why almost always sounds accusatory. Why would you wear that shirt today? Why would you think like that? Both of those things sound to me like, why are you so stupid? How's that going to go in the conversation, right? So, but understanding the why, and Simon Sinek talks about this, getting to the why. But if you ask the question why, you are actually challenging them. And this is what people are hearing. It's not your intentions, not what you said. So there's a better way to get to that. And that's to get them to tell stories by asking open-ended questions. What's an open-ended question? Something that requires something more than a yes or no answer. A yes or no answer ends a conversation. It ends dialogue. Do you like it when it's sunny? Yep. Well, that's about it. That's all we're going to talk about. So use this acronym. If you have trouble trying to figure out how to ask an open-ended question, use the acronym TED. Keep that in mind. Tell, explain, or describe. If you start a sentence with any of those words, they cannot answer you with yes or no. They've got to tell you a story. The next step in their storytelling is to go deeper. If anyone studied the Toyota manufacturing company, they used a process called Kaizen. And basically what it gets down to is continue to ask why, get down to the 5 whys. Anyone ever heard that statement? 5 whys. Well, again, why is accusatory. So if I take your statement to some story you're telling, I will find something in there, keyword that you've said. And how do I know it's a keyword? Inflection in your voice, watching your eyebrows raise, just the body language thing. I'm watching what you're saying about a word. And I'm going to say, well, a minute ago, you talked about backpacks. Can you tell me why those are important? Tell me more about that. Can you explain to me how that works? Describe how that plays in the field, right? Keep doing that, and you will eventually get down to the real key of the issue. I like saying this line, but Captain Jack Sparrow from the Pirates of the Caribbean says, the problem's not the problem. It's your attitude about the problem that's the problem. And I think that applies here as well. So if my attitude is that I want to know more from you, I continually ask you more. Getting you to tell more of your story gives me more and more information. Great. What else does it do? It shows a level of care. If I just take your first response and debate it right away, I don't care about what you said. I'm just trying to win the deal. But if I'm asking 4 or 5 questions about your stories, you'll see that I care to learn enough about you. And what happens when people care? We go from this hostile position to a more relaxed position, and we're no longer in an adversarial spot. You show care for somebody, it's very difficult for them to be adversarial with you. You want to take a fight and knock it down a little bit? Ask them some questions about their story, why they feel the way they feel. But again, don't ask the way why. The ABCs are basically when you get down into the thing that politicians do, right? Agree where you can agree, build on a consensus, using yes and instead of but. I know when people have heard that before. If I say something and I say but, that means whatever I said before doesn't matter, right? That part didn't matter. What I want you to hear is this part. But yes and makes a difference. That's interesting. Yes, I can see how that works. And then put your point of view out as well. Gives people a say, instead of saying but, meaning you're wrong, right? So yes, and yes, I see how you can see that. And here's another thought, right? And then compare the differences too, and see what that looks like. The moving to action. This part I like, especially those of you who hold meetings. Dialogue is not decision. We get into a boardroom or a conference room and we're sitting around talking about it, and that's not decision making. That's discussion. That's dialogue. That's information gathering. Right. One thing that I always recommend to people, and it's because of negative experiences I've had meetings like this. Okay, here's what we need to do. Go get 12 new customers. Boom. And everyone agrees. That's what we need to do. Great. Everyone goes out and they expect someone else to do those things that we need, 12 new customers or whatever it is that we have agreed to. So we're going to get to that in just a minute, but I start a meeting with this. So here's the purpose of the meeting is going to be, and here are the things that we need to decide. Now I'm going to tell you how we're going to talk about how we're going to decide those things. There's 4 different options that you always have: the command, consult, vote, and the consensus. The command is if I'm the boss, I'm going to make the decision. Consult is I'm the boss. The decision is going to end up ultimately being mine because it's my responsibility. However, I want to find out what you have to say about this. There's the voting. Majority wins, right? You can vote for a president that way, but I don't recommend voting for business issues like that. Unless the issue is where we're going to lunch today, right? Something that's insignificant, go ahead and vote on it. And my favorite is consensus. And the reason I like consensus, so the downside of consensus is that sometimes if we go into just compromise to get to consensus, that's not the best solution, although it might be faster. Consensus takes time. And all consensus means is we're going to talk this through until everybody can support the idea. It may not be your first choice. You may still think a different idea is the better one, but we're talking through so that we can all support. That's what consensus is. Not always possible, and it takes a while. So here's the point on all this decision-making process. At the beginning of the meeting, I am going to let the people that work for me know how we're going to make the decision. And the reason is because if people think we're going to have a vote or consensus and I make a command decision, they're all going to be upset. They wasted their time. You didn't care about what I had to say, right? So I let them know up front, hey, this is going to be something that I'm going to end up ultimately deciding, but I'd love to have your input and I'll weigh it all, right, before I end up making that decision. If I said that at the beginning of the meeting, I'm not disappointing anybody, and they will end up giving me their opinion. But if they think we're going to work to consensus and I just do a command or a consult kind of concept, there will be some disappointed people. And the ultimate result of that, they will quit talking to you. They will quit sharing their ideas with you if that's how you go about it. Implementing a plan, and I know I'm speaking fast, so implementing a plan of action, this is important. The other thing that I like to do, go back to hey, we need to do something, right? And we don't assign it to anybody. Sure, what do we need? Add this. From who? Assign it specifically to an individual. It may take an entire team, but I've got a champion that I'm assigning that to because that person is ultimately responsible for the delivery. Now is not, no question about it. And by when? When I was a young manager, I avoided giving deadlines, and I still do from time to time. I avoided it because I've got a pretty strong personality, and I thought that by giving people deadlines, they were going to think I'm more demanding. When actually, the truth is people appreciate having a deadline. First, because we work really well on deadlines. I remember when I was in school, when a report was due on Monday, I wrote it on Sunday. Right? If it wasn't for that deadline, it wasn't due till the end of the semester. I waited to the end of the semester to put it out. So knowing the expectations of the person that's giving that are important because we work well on that. The second is about the expectations. I've had many times in my career when I've said, okay, Joe, I need you to do this, boom, and just left it at that. And Joe didn't come back with things as fast as I wanted her to. What was my deadline? Well, in my mind, it was yesterday. And Joe's mind thought it's the 7th or 8th thing on his list of things that I've already given him to do. So here's what happens, though. When I give a deadline that's unrealistic based on all the other needs and other things that they have in there, it gives that, by giving that person my expectations of what the deadline should be, it gives them the opportunity to push back and say, hey, whoa, you've given me 7 other things already. Is this more important than this one? Or this one? Or this one? Can I bump that one down and change the deadline? They have a chance to negotiate realistic deadlines so that you're not disappointed in whatever production that they're doing. So I think I've looked at changing that by giving deadlines, the buy-win portion in this, as of high importance and a gift to the people I'm giving it to. I really see it that way now, that it's a gift for them And it's not arrogant of me. It's not demanding of me. It's not all those negative things of me to tell them, here's when I'd like to see it by, or here's when I need it. And if it's unrealistic, they have an opportunity to tell me. And that's just fair. So we're going to rush through this portion, but this is a second book. If you want to read a secondary book, this is the good one. Edward Schein wrote a book called Humble Inquiry. And what's really cool about this is the subtitle of this book. And the subtitle is The Gentle Art of Asking, Not Telling. Remember back when we talked at the beginning of this about how many people have 2-year-olds or 12-year-olds or teenagers that like to be told what to do? None of them. So the gentle art of asking, not telling. And you can get what you want by asking questions and getting people to come to the answers. And maybe those answers are better than what you originally thought of anyway. So enlisting their support, enlisting their thoughts and ideas. So asking questions gets people to believe that the idea is theirs. And once the idea is theirs, you don't have to manage anybody. They will fulfill those things. So good secondary book to read. We're going to be running out of time, so I'm not going to do that. But the real reason for doing this is that it really builds relationships. When you know I care about what you have to say, you're going to like me just a little bit better than if I just keep telling you what to do. Tell me if that doesn't ring true to you. Talked about the circle of trust, and there's 3 key words in here that I think that fit really well and have actually changed my life. I haven't mastered them all yet. The dependability, I think I've always been, but the 3 words that were new to me in the past 12 years, humility, empathy, and vulnerability. Haven't quite mastered them all yet, working hard on it. The empathy's come okay. The vulnerability, I used to think of that as a negative. If I'm being vulnerable, I'm being weak. In fact, that's what I was taught. In my family of origin, if you were vulnerable, people would stamp on your neck with their boot. It's just the way it worked. And it taught me not to be. What I've come to find out in my later years is that vulnerability is the most attractive quality I can have. Not physically attractive. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about attracting others. If I'm being vulnerable, in fact, if I tell you a story right now, someone would reach out and put their hand on my shoulder and say, dude, how can I help? They would just do that. Like being vulnerable, exposing yourself a little bit. You can't do it everywhere and all the time. I get it. But when the opportunity becomes there for you to be vulnerable, be vulnerable. It will draw people to you. Drawing to you, creating those relationships through building trust. Where is this humble inquiry appropriate and effective? Everywhere. Parent, child, boss, subordinate, spouse, interdepartmental teams, friends, peers. Everywhere you go, this approach works, with the exception of those narcissists and those sociopaths. They don't care about you. They just don't. It's just the way it works. I'm going to walk through this really quick. The type of questions, either the TED questions. Why does that make you angry? Accusatory? Hey, how'd that make you feel? I feel angry. Oh, well, what do you think that was about? Kind of a softer, gentler way to get to their why, right? So just much less threatening. So why doesn't this just immediately read 2 books and you're an expert? I'll give you an example. 8 years into this study, I had this text. Now remember, text is way down on that list. I had this text with someone I love, my 19-year-old son. I'd asked him to do a task, and that was to clean the pool. I asked you to brush the whole pool, not just the sides. You wonder why people don't give you credit. Well, the results of your actions or inaction is why. Pretty mean. My son writes back, that's literally bullshit. I cleaned the whole pool, including the stairs, and turned the robot on afterwards. Don't ask me to do anything for you anymore. Go look at the pool. Like the results are in the pudding. I'm being righteous here. I'm right. Pool's still a mess, right? And then I said, okay, now here we get another threatening. This is motivation here. Okay, if that's how you want it, call the insurance company, buy your own insurance. I'm going to cancel your policy today. Also, rent's due today for the, and maybe you should consider paying me back all you owe me. You sure you want to go down this path? So the threat, right? Which I thought was going to be motivational. Well, it did motivate him. I don't understand why you're such an asshole. I don't. You're hurtful to my self-esteem. This is a kid I love. I'm hurting his self-esteem. I'm using text. Anyway. And I'm being high and mighty again. I have very little of you, and I never call you an asshole, right? Yeah, you do a lot, right? That was the conversation of a so-called expert with somebody he loves. How'd that go over? So why bother? Here's the 3 circles of trust. Start with a good intention, builds authenticity. You go through that again with the authenticity that you've gained, listen to understand, share from experience, deliver on the promise, turns to respect, back to respect. And that this is the respect that's now earned. You've earned that from them because of your authentic behavior. Listen to understand, share and deliver on the promise. It doesn't take 12 times for me to watch you do the thing for me to trust you. If we go through this cycle, I believe that within 3 cycles, we are now going to have a relationship built on trust and respect. Harvey Mackay, which wrote the book How to Swim with Sharks Without Being Eaten Alive, and had Mackay envelopes, and he said the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationships, and the quality of your business is no different. So this is not a touchy-feely how to deal with your family kind of a situation, although the techniques work in the family as well as they work in your business. And so that's it for the presentation today, right at 10:50. John, did you have anything else that came up question-wise that before people start?
No other questions.
Okay.
But there was some, just some good conversation going back and forth on some of the topics you were talking about.
Okay.
So if anybody does have any questions, great time to ask some questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question.
And while you're doing that, what I'd encourage you to do is if we're not already first connections on LinkedIn, please hit me up. I love connecting with people that and then ask questions, provide critique, provide comments, anything that we should keep doing, things we shouldn't do, in this kind of stuff. Always helpful. Further conversations that you want to have, great. Email, phone call, you got all that information here as well. And we'll send out some follow-up emails on that, how to get involved in a class if you'd like to do that as well, or bring your whole team in and we do a course with those. So that's all available. Well, I appreciate the time that everyone put into this. We're 2 minutes over right now. So thank you very much. Please, again, hit me up on LinkedIn and let's connect that way. And let's keep talking.